All right. I see that it is now 4 o'clock. So hello, everyone. I'm Joni Rutter, and I'm here to welcome you to our community forum today for N3C. So good afternoon. I think most of you probably it is afternoon, so I think we're relatively safe there. But I also want to say thanks for being here today on this very cold and very snowy day. Many of this team, I think, on the panel are probably calling from home. Luckily, we all have power, but it's very difficult to get around out there due to all of the ice and snow. But we're delighted to be here today. So, oh, I see we lost the slides. Hopefully we can get those back. There we go. So again, my name is Joni Rutter. I am the director of the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences at NCATS. And today we're here to really talk about and focus on N3C and talk a little bit more about sort of where we've been, where we're going, the vision, and I hope to talk to you a little bit about some of what you're thinking, any concerns you might have, and have a bit of a conversation at the end. So I want to just kind of first acknowledge that it's been a very difficult and challenging year, and I can only imagine how frustrating it's been for many of you. Over the last 4 months alone, all of you have lost access to data in N3C. You've had analyses interrupted, papers paused, or had trainees and teams sort of left in limbo doing those analyses. And those impacts are very real. And I know that I have been concerned about those as well. It's entirely reasonable to feel disappointed or even angry about how things have unfolded over that time. But I want to be clear about something today. What I've believed in all along, even when N3C access was disrupted, is that we're here to move forward, not to discard what we've built. N3C remains a uniquely powerful resource at the national level, and the work, the trust, the scientific insights that are embedded in it are worth preserving and strengthening. And that to me is really the reason and purpose of this conversation today. Our goal now is to take what has worked, fix what didn't work, and build a version of N3C that is more resilient, more scalable, and better positioned for the future. So that's what I'd like to cover today. And so on the next slide, though, I want to ground you in what actually happened, what transpired over the last year. This timeline really captures the reality of what's happened in 2025 and early 2026. We had a communications moratorium that started about a year ago. We had staffing reductions that happened early in the year. And then all of these different activities of where we could actually have some community forums. And we were sort of starting back up again. And then we had a government shutdown that was the longest government shutdown in history. And then sort of around that time of the government shutdown, or actually right before, N3C platform went offline. And so we've been without that platform for 4 months until very recently. And much of this, though, was outside of the control of the N3C team. It was actually outside of the control of NCATS. And I really think it's important to understand this because obviously if we could have projected any of these activities or even prevented them, we would have done so. But here's where we are now. And I want to go ahead and just be very clear and direct about the reason for the platform move. And if you go to the next slide, we'll show a little bit of this. So the reason that the N3C platform shut down and move was it was really HHS driven, not because they wanted to shut down the N3C platform, but there were cost efficiencies across the agency that they were trying to understand and trying to actually consolidate into more of a platform-based approach for HHS more broadly. And N3C was a part of that rubric that they were taking a look at. They're also taking a look at other agencies as well. And so, for example, at CMS, they're looking at other data, CDC, FDA, et cetera. And those agencies have data that are relevant to N3C. And so thinking about this at a scale that's HHS-wide is really the rationale behind this. So this was not a reflection of N3C's values or performance. In fact, the N3C scale and the potential were exactly why it became part of these broader conversations. And from that moment that the access was stopped. And so at the very bottom of this slide, I want to acknowledge that the HHS Chief Information Officer, Clark Miner, the Deputy Chief of Staff, Jake Levine, as well as the NIH Director, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, they all worked very closely with me and very hard at getting N3C back up and running to establish a viable path forward. And then there were also outside groups such as the NCATS Alliance and others, and their engagement has also been really critical to where we are today. Not to mention many of the CTASAs who raised concerns as well. And so as we discuss the infrastructure transition, I want to state something very unequivocally. Your data has always been, and continues to be under the exclusive management of NCATS. The data stewardship, privacy, security, institutional trust, all of these have remained non-negotiable pillars of N3C. And we have those still today in our re-instantiation of N3C. So on the next slide, I just want to go over sort of how we talked about and worked through the backups for N3C during this time. We have over 1,000 N3C projects that were divided into sort of research projects and non-research projects. And of those, about 300 of those didn't really contain sort of these tangible assets. And of the rest of those, the remaining projects, the code was successfully backed up from all of those studies, but except for 4 of those, and we're still looking into that. And then a small subset of projects that were identified and marked for data backup as well. So we have data and code for these. And some of them had a few issues as well that we're continuing to look into. So on the next slide, there were some key outcomes of this disruption that we learned really a lot during this time. And we never lost hope that we would rebuild. But it took us quite many months to really think about what needed to be done to set us up for success for the future. So we created an access dashboard. We backed up reports and training materials and many other codes, et cetera. And we had more recently a technical meeting to plan for the rebuild. And so we're very excited about where we are today because of how we know that we can rebuild something that is stronger and better for the future. Now, one outcome of the disruption, and perhaps an unexpected one, is that N3C now has heightened visibility across HHS and Congress. I spoke quite frequently and often to as many people as I could talk to about what was happening. And most recently, I briefed the House Doctors Caucus on the Hill on NCATS's programs, broadly speaking, but N3C was one of the ones that I talked about. And N3C generated the strongest interest. And as many of you have probably seen, the House has passed a spending bill that's now awaiting the Senate in action. That includes $4 million specifically designated for N3C. Obviously, it still has a few steps to go through, but that is a strong signal of confidence in this resource and in its future and in the people who make N3C happen. So this brings me to sort of the next slide. And that's really kind of talking about the governance. During COVID, N3C governance had to be broad, it had to be inclusive and fast moving. And I want to acknowledge all of the people who've been so involved in all of those processes and are continuing to be involved in what we do going forward. So this slide is really just a reminder for me to say a big thank you to all of you. This is showing hundreds of investigators, clinicians, data scientists, informaticians, trainees, institutional partners, everyone who's really built and sustained and believed in N3C, often under very intense pressure and uncertainty. But N3C exists because of your work, your trust, and your willingness to collaborate at a national scale to help advance the science of health and ultimately of patients. So as we move into a new chapter, and one that is no longer sort of built on sort of this COVID response, but is becoming more of a durable national research infrastructure, we need a governance that's focused, strategic, and able to help with decision-making at a bigger scale. And so our intent now is to really think about not how to narrow voices, but how to sharpen our voices so that we can make timely and informed decisions with the community. And to support this, we're forming a strategic partners group, drawing from CTSA partners, key stakeholders, and others to help guide our strategy and shape governance moving forward. And you're going to hear a little bit more about this today, including from Rebecca Baker, who we've brought on board, and we're very excited to have her on board. She's going to be leading this effort. And we've also strengthened the internal N3C team. Several members will be speaking today about where things stand and how you can engage. And I just also want to give a special shout out to the team that I have worked very closely with, almost on an hourly basis rather than a daily basis over the last 4 months. And somehow they still haven't complained about that. But I want to say thanks to Mike Kurilla, Andy Kelly, Chris Dillon, Hythem Sidky, Nathan Hodeling, and Rebecca Baker, along with the exceptional and deep team who I didn't talk with on an hourly basis, but I know they were there. I want to thank all of them as well from all of our partners. So today is about resetting with purpose, and we're committed to rebuilding N3C with you, not by erasing its history, but by making our mark indelible, by learning from it and building something that is stronger together. And so with that, I think I'm going to introduce the next slide. And now, Hythem Sidky, please take over from here.
Thank you, Joni. Excuse me. Next slide. So I'm sure one of those things on everyone's mind is, given the platform disruption that took place, at least from the technical perspective, what mitigation strategies have been put in place to prevent or minimize that kind of disruption again. So I just wanted to start off from the what Joni said, which is that all data has been and continues to be under the exclusive management of NCATS. But given that, we recognize that N3C as a monolith definitely makes it much more vulnerable to these kinds of disruptions. And that means disrupting people's research, disrupting transparency and access and reproducibilities and things like that. And so one thing we're working towards is to think of N3C as an ecosystem of applications. You have applications that conduct data ingestion harmonization. You have the analytical environment. You have a concept set builder, a phenotype explorer. You have a data access management system and other components. And so what this decoupled architecture does is it eliminates that single point of failure. It doesn't mean that it is impossible for any one of these individual applications to potentially experience some downtime, but it does mean that we are far more resilient to those kinds of things happening, and we can bring things back up much quicker should that kind of disruption take place. The other thing is that the foundations for these components is their portability, they're platform agnostic, and it makes sure that things are maximally, we can maintain maximum continuity in the event of things like that. Of course, a lot of investigators here have gotten very familiar with the Palantir Foundry environment, and the Foundry environment will remain the analytic environment where researchers can go in and conduct research, and we'll hear a little bit more about changes to that environment because the new Foundry environment is going to be different from what we had previously. But the general idea here is that we are putting in place technical mitigation strategies to minimize the impact of any future disruption. Next slide. Another thing I wanted to highlight here, again, we had talked about this at the prior community forum, is kind of this idea of moving away from individual disease silos and towards a model that's going to be much more flexible and accommodating of all the kinds of research that everyone here wants to conduct. So just kind of at a very high level, we've termed this idea the dynamic workspaces model, and I'll walk through kind of the life cycle of data in a moment. But the idea is an investigator or researcher, along with their standard data access request, can craft a phenotype which defines the patient population of interest for them. Now, with the clinical pilots that a lot of us have been involved in, we've seen this idea of a disease-agnostic data contribution to N3C, and with the dynamic workspaces, it enables investigators to communicate with institutions and their representatives the patient populations that are meaningful to their research questions. So it maximizes alignment between scientific use and access to data. There's a data access request feedback committee that provides investigators feedback on their phenotypes and their data access request. And then all of this works together with the same system that we have in N3C that does the linkage, the privacy preserving record linkage, the centralized ingestion and harmonization of data, and the data access committee that ultimately serves to review these requests that ultimately result in the provisioning of a dynamic workspace. Now, if all this sounded a bit abstract, we can go to the next slide, and I wanted to walk us all through what this looks like in person, so from the perspective of an investigator. So if you're a researcher, you would craft your data access request. This data access request has a computable phenotype that's attached to it that you would craft, or that would be crafted by others in a kind of a database or an environment where people can build these things and exchange them. You would select the data sets that are of interest, so that could be electronic health records. You could link it with mortality and claims and other data sets as well. You would have the appropriate IRB documentation, and you'd request the data access tier of interest. That submission would go to a data access request feedback committee. This is community driven, so it's driven by all of you. And so the feedback committee would provide informal feedback to researchers on their request. Right. So what would that look like? Does that phenotype make sense? Are you capturing the appropriate patient population? Is this request too broad for institutions, and so on and so forth? After that feedback takes place, these data access requests would go out to institutions that want to have granular control over the access to their data. And Kristen is going to talk more about the data governance side of things. But as an institution, you have the ability, you have the option to say, hey, I want to review each and every specific data access request that is requesting access to our data. And then you would have an opt-out period where you would ultimately make a decision on that. Once all the decision making has taken place, so all those rules have happened and been aggregated during a review period, that request would go to the NIH Data Access Committee. So this is that same DAC that we've had in place for N3C. That would get reviewed, go under a final review, and then approval of that data access request. And then that data assembly and integration takes place. So everything is dynamically provisioned and aggregated, all the data sets that are requested, all the linkages that have been requested, and then that gets provisioned in that same analytical environment that you would have access to. You have access to the standard analytical tools. You'd be able to conduct your research in that secure environment. And then with that, we'd have the standard publication and download export controls. So you'd submit download requests, you'd go through the publication committee. But also another important piece of this is we've refined the lifecycle management of these data access requests. An initial submission would give you access for 1 year, and that would be renewable twice for a total of 3 years. So that gives institutions a lot of clarity into the time boundedness of specific research investigations. And it would also prepare the investigators knowing that they have a 3-year window to conduct their research. Of course, you can always submit that DAR once again for an extension, but it would go through that whole cycle again. And so that kind of gives you, in a nutshell, this idea behind that dynamic workspaces model that we're working towards. Next slide. And I'll hand it off to Kristen.
Hello, you can go to the next slide. I'm going to give just a little bit of an overview of operational and UI changes to the new platform, what remains the same, what has changed, and what we're doing to smooth the transition from the old to the new. Apologies if anyone's looking at my camera. The sun has come back today with a vengeance. So with the new platform, the new UI and changes to the processes, the idea is that all of our active users that were active in the platform previously 4 months ago will still be registered for the N3C platform. New investigators will not be able to register for now. That's because we are getting a new registration system online, but will be in the future. Login will work exactly the same as it always has. The link is still the same as previously. There are plenty of things that do look a bit different though. For instance, the concept set builder will not be currently available in the new platform yet. So you can still have access to previous concept sets, but not the concept set builder. Code workbooks are no longer available in the new platform. There is going to be more information in a couple slides about what we're doing to smooth that transition, because we do realize the vast majority of the users were using the code workbook application to do their research. And your projects are still there. We know who you are. The users and groups have been transferred from the old platform to the new. So if you go to the next slide. What is in progress? So because workbooks are not available, what can you do if workbooks is generally what you used? We are working on solutions to allow users to bring the code that, remember in December, a lot of users were exporting their workbook code as GitHub repositories on their local machines. We are working on allowing users to be able to bring that workbook code back through into code workspaces, which allows you to use Jupyter notebooks in the new Foundry platform. Logic liaison templates will not be present. We are working on a replacement for code templates. As you can imagine, logic liaison templates were native to the code workbooks, so we are working on a solution. And we are also working on producing help documentation currently so that users that are getting back into this new platform are able to get started very quickly because you knew how it was before, and we want to smooth that transition. You can go to the next slide. But this isn't to say that we didn't lose anything with the new platform. Historical download request and publication intent data has not been transferred to the new platform. So for instance, if you had submitted a download request in late 2024 or something like that, they will not be in the new platform. Research project contents will not be available, so the assets themselves from your old projects will not be in the new platform. The data pipelines have not been transitioned for DI&H. All but 2 data releases have not been transferred. So we have both a release from prior to DTA expiry and the most recent COVID data release in both de-identified and LDS form. But that does mean that we have lost we don't have greater than 190 data releases that the previous platform had. Additionally, as I mentioned before, the concept set builder is not in the new platform. We do not have access to code workbooks, and the logic liaison templates are not there. You can go to the next slide. But there are some legacy processes that will be available. The publication intent process and download request submissions will be available. Existing registered users can submit for new projects or data use requests. The pre-DTA expiration data release will be available to the same investigators as it was prior, and the latest release is also available. But we will no longer be receiving COVID submissions. So as we work through testing all of these different workflows and making sure that everything works for when we open back up to the public and you can get back in to work on your research progress. You can go to the next slide, and then I think I'll hand it off to Chris Dillon.
Awesome. Thanks, Kristen. I appreciate it. Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Dillon, and I'm the agreement lead for N3C. Next slide, please. So with the pivot to this reconstituted platform, we did take the opportunity to review our agreements, and we understand that there are a lot of agreements that support both the COVID and the new clinical platform. We've decided to make a pivot to new agreements with much more transparency and remove some of the administrative burden that the old agreements introduced. Those new agreements will not require extensions, and they do contain a lot of the core terms and conditions from the original agreements, such as your data will never leave the N3C enclave. We also have developed a new data access management environment, coined DAME, which will assist in the workflow and transparency of executing and processing all of these agreements. That way, you know exactly where you stand or your institution stands with the agreements, and you're able to understand what needs to be done to move them to the next stage. Lastly, we've also implemented some flexibility for when we graduate out of our new government pilot phase that Hythem alluded to in an earlier slide. Next slide, please. So with this new governance pilot, we've really listened to exactly what you all have asked for, which is a little bit more granular control around the way your data is used in the N3C enclave. Option A relies on the N3C DAC to review and review and approve all data access requests. Therefore, you've provided the trust in N3C DAC to review and approve those DARs. Option B is slightly different in that the contributing institution is permitted to complete a data use limitation form. This form has been customary around the NIH for some time, and it allows your institution to categorically limit different areas of research that you would not like your data used for. Option C is this granular opt-out that we've spoken about, and this is going to give your institution the utmost control over the way your data is used. This will require some engagement with your site to be able to review these data access requests in a timely manner. As you can understand, option A and B allow us to spin up environments or environments within N3C rather quickly. Option C will delay that slightly, so we really do need to balance the amount of time we provide the institutions to review the data access requests and when we can spin up the analytical environment for the researchers submitting the DAR. There is a document that has all of these options much more fleshed out with a lot more detail that will be provided to you with the data transfer agreement, so you will be informed on these different options when you are reviewing and completing the data transfer agreements. Next slide, please. Another reason why we needed to get new agreements is the NIH is transitioning to a new controlled access data repository policy. This policy asks you as an institution to identify certain roles that will be engaged and review data access requests every time they're submitted to the N3C. The binding official is going to be somebody that just signs the agreement. That's typically going to be somebody in your tech transfer or sponsored research office. Those are the individuals who always historically have signed the agreements for N3C. Two new roles that are going to have a little bit more specificity around them are the institutional signing official and the data access requester. The ISO is an individual in your institution that will review data access requests and and approve the focus of those data access requests. There is also a data access requester who is going to be the individual that submits the data access request. This is going to be somebody equivalent to a tenure track investigator or senior level researcher. Unfortunately, the ISO and the data access requester cannot be the same person. An approved user is just somebody that's in the enclave and is able to access requests and perform research based on the approval from the N3C DAC. All of these different roles are rather confusing. We're trying to grapple with them ourselves, but there is documentation out there to help guide you in identifying these roles, and we are always available to help lend some understanding to some things that may be a little bit more confusing. That's it for me, and if you do have any questions, please feel free to send me an email or email the N3C email to ask any more questions around the agreements or NIH Cater. Next slide, please. On to Rebecca.
Thanks, Chris, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm so pleased to be here with you today. I'm a relatively new member of the NCATS team, working on engagements with the N3C community, or all of you. So it's a pleasure to be joining today's discussion. Next slide, please. So you've heard a lot already today about the changes that the N3C platform has gone through and will go through. And from the perspective of engagement, what we're working to build is really reestablishing trust for this new platform as it evolves, and to do this through transparent governance and through transparent communication. We want the platform to be useful and utilized, so driving adoption through the research communities and demonstrating our value, showcasing what the platform can do, what it can do in less time, and what research outcomes it can bring about through our collaboration. And ultimately, our goal is to build a sustainable community of researchers, institutions, partners, and stakeholders in the community to really show how collaborative science can drive forward our health and research. So next slide, please. we heard, one of the early messages we heard from this community is that you all would like more of a voice in how we collaborate through the N3C platform. And so I'm excited to echo the announcement of the creation of the N3C Strategic Partners Committee. This is a new group. We're still standing it up, but our vision is that we'll have 8 to 15 thoughtful, experienced voices working together with NIH to guide the N3C platform. The group will comprise data contributors and users. And in the future, our vision is to also find ways to bring in the voices of our federal partners and community stakeholders. The group should create a transparent forum for information exchange. There's going to be a lot of new and exciting things the platform can do, and this group is a way to share that information and also to shape the future direction of what we can do through research across a broad and expanding range of health and disease domains. So in the next slide, you'll see that the creation of this group is just one of the many new communication and engagement tactics we're trying to plan at this time. We also aim to increase our communication. This forum is just the first of many ways that we hope to engage with you through ongoing frequent communication about the status of the platform and its direction as it evolves. We also aim to create new resources for data contributors and users to maximize the value of the platform, to collaborate with our scientific and technical partners, and really work together to tell the story of how important our research is, all the exciting things it can do, and establish that sense of shared mission so that we're really working together as the platform takes on its new life. So I know this is a group with a lot of good ideas, creative approaches. I'm not sure we'll have time to discuss them all today, so I've just dropped this email in here so you can send us your ideas. But I look forward to working with all of you. I look forward to your insights, and I'm very pleased to now turn it over to Dr. Mike Kurilla, who will facilitate our question and answer session. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. We have a couple of questions in the Q&A already that I just wanted to make everyone aware of. Someone had asked what initiatives were consolidated in this effort, meaning were 2 Foundry instances for 2 federal health initiatives consolidated, which ones? So I think it's important to emphasize that there have been other Foundry instances across HHS, and this is part of what HHS is trying to do in terms of a consolidation process from the standpoint of a kind of umbrella arrangement where different components of the HHS alphabet soup can take advantage of, instead of everyone having to go out and get their own specific instance, take advantage of an HHS negotiated rate. We'll see as this moves forward, but I think it's important to emphasize going forward that the N3C, the new N3C Foundry instance is exclusive for N3C, so we're not being lumped into other platforms that have been developed. It is going to be N3C specific. The next question the next question that was posed was, I think, a little bit of confusion. Can you clarify that can you clarify the no COVID submissions? My team has manuscripts in process based on the COVID data. Are we able to finish those at a new platform? So the key point is here, no submission of new COVID data from contributors, but you are able to still use and submit new projects around the COVID data. So I think that's pretty clear. How do these changes complement and/or align with data counts? Joni, you maybe want to address that if you can.
Yes, we're working very closely with data counts too, and essentially thinking about how it can help streamline the access of the data contributors to the data counts instance and then to the N3C instance. And we're working on those pipelines now. We still have a ways to go based on some of the sort of the delays that we've seen already, but we're actively talking with data counts and making sure that that's going to be aligned. We don't want you to be able to, we don't want you to have to essentially send multiple data packages, if you will, to different resources. And so we want to work with data counts to make sure that we're part of that sort of environment.
Yeah, I think it's also important to emphasize that there are some capabilities of data counts that we find that would be advantageous for N3C to collaborate with and utilize in many ways. Okay, the next question coming in is, will there be funding for institutions providing data that now need new approval requester roles locally? Joni, you have any comment on that?
Sure, I'll take that one. Yeah, so to be clear, I don't know yet. We don't have a budget yet, so I'm still waiting before I will answer that question a little bit more clearly. But I will say this, you know, if your institution needs it, that's one thing, but we're actually trying to do a lot of things to reduce the needs of and the sort of efforts that are required to provide data. A lot of the funding that we'd like to do is essentially for research use. And so if we can think about that a little bit more, that's what we're really trying to drive to. But that doesn't mean that it's off the table. Certainly CTSAs and other institutions that are funded to do research of this kind, there might be ways to take a look at that and evaluate that. But that is, there are already dollars that are being used for essentially a lot of this work. And so we're looking really to focus on the research efforts as well. But again, not off the table. We just want to make sure we're doing it in an appropriate fashion.
Okay. All right. The next question is, how will the renal and cancer enclaves be represented in this new structure? Will prior pilot data transmissions be used, or will these initiatives be rolled into dynamic workspaces? If the latter, will they each have one workspace?
Yeah, so I think I can answer that question. So the details of how the renal and cancer pilot efforts will live on in the dynamic workspaces model are still being worked out, but the key things to highlight are that there have been significant changes to the underlying infrastructure with that model, and there's a reestablishment of the data governance framework that Dillon went over. And so what that means is that there will be all new data transfer agreements. The unfortunate aspect of that, of course, is it requires that all the institutions that went through that process to get those agreements executed will have to go through that process again, and so it'll take time for that process to happen again. But the silver lining or the advantage of this, of course, is that this new model is simpler, it's more efficient, and it addresses a lot of the feedback that we got from folks early on about defining patient populations and phenotypes under the old pilot structure. And so our hope is that this evolution will ultimately make it easier to contribute data and for it to be leveraged in ways that are meaningful to the cancer effort and the renal effort. And so I would kind of think about the two pilots independently of the underlying data infrastructure. There's going to be a large change to the underlying data infrastructure, but that change should impart more flexibility on those pilot efforts and for the investigators participating in them.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is: are there? And I think I know the answer to this, but I'm gonna punt it to Hythem as well. Are there any alternative pathways other than those described today for anyone, including government agencies, to access the N3C data?
I actually have Joni answer that one.
Let's see, are there, for anyone to, so I'm not sure I'm understanding the question, but I think what I would say is that essentially this is an NIH research resource. And so if you have the ability to apply for access with a research question to use the data, we will evaluate that and grant access based on that request, just as we've done before. And so essentially all of the processes that we've used in N3C COVID are going to apply to N3C clinical. And so you can't just go into the database and use it for any reason. There will be a very clear provenance of the research questions that are being asked and by whom, and we will be able to evaluate that. And that will go through our access process that Hythem actually described earlier. And again, this will probably look very similar to what we've had before. Anything to add from the team on that one?
I will mention that our data transfer agreements require that anyone accessing the data have a data use agreement, as well as been approved for access by our N3C DAC. So there is everyone's coming in through the front door to access the data. Everyone is adhering to all the same restrictions that are in the data transfer agreement as everybody else.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next question was, I may have missed, but when will we have research platform available for analyses? I don't think we have a firm date, but do we have a rough time frame are we talking about?
Yeah, late February. So we're hoping to open up to the public late February.
So
okay,
about 4 weeks or so. Yeah.
Okay. The next question I think might be, again, a little bit of confusion. It says, apologies, might you clarify if this relates to N3C COVID and N3C clinical? Thanks. The answer I would say is that N3C COVID is basically going away, and we will be entirely N3C clinical, but N3C COVID will be part of or a component of clinical. Anybody else have?
Yeah,
to
provide some broader framing. So we are not accepting new data submissions for COVID, right? So imagine that that's frozen in time. Of course, we want to maintain continuity with your ongoing research projects, reproducibility for research, et cetera. And so what's coming online, hopefully within the next 4 weeks, is kind of that image, an archive of the releases that we had in the prior COVID environment. Everything new moving forward, so new data submissions, new data access requests, et cetera, that will all happen under that dynamic workspaces model. If eventually, what will happen is the data that should be present under the dynamic workspaces model should be a superset of the COVID patient data. And so should you be interested in carrying out further investigations, you can then submit an appropriate phenotype that would live under that model. But the short-term priority is to maintain access, or to maintain continuity of access to investigators, and to kind of provide you that opportunity until the dynamic workspaces environment is ready.
Okay, thanks. The next question, technical question, I think Hythem or Kristen can answer this. Will I be able to code with the R language? R was supported in the code workbooks, but not the code repositories in the previous version of the platform.
Yes, so that is why we are looking at ways to transition people who are using code workbooks into using code workspaces. And code workspaces has Jupyter Lab and VS Code, which have different options for using R, whether you want to use it via the terminal or an RStudio IDE. So there will be a way to code within R in the new platform.
Okay, thanks. All right, the next question is, for our ongoing previously approved projects, do we have to resubmit the request to access our research space?
Yes. So in the new platform, no research projects were moved over from the old platform, all of their assets included. So you will have to submit a new DUR, but that should be a relatively streamlined process. The research space, though, will not, even if we had moved it over, would not have had everything that you had in your old research workspace. And so in this new environment, it will be wiped clean. And then hopefully, if you are able to export your code from the previous platform, that we are working on materials in order for you to get that code back in to a workspace.
Okay. All right. The next question, I think, is a clarification of an earlier question. I think it sort of targets what the intention was. Can another government agency request and use the data without going through the process detailed today?
Hey, Mike, I responded to that comment, and I'm going to be very clear again. The answer is no. The data will not leave the enclave per the terms of the data transfer agreement, and anyone accessing the data must have an active DUA and an approved DAR in place to access the data. All DAR abstracts will also be made public, just like with the COVID enclave. So there's a sense of transparency around it, and there's also a sense of control as to who can actually get into the enclave and access the data.
And so to be clear, Chris, for someone from another government agency who wants to come into N3C, they will be going through the same process that any academic investigator would be going through in terms of what they submit, what they have to, how they are reviewed. There is no backdoor for special.
No, if we receive an email from somebody that says, hey, I want to access this data set, the answer is sure. Here's the DUA. Please have your institution complete it. Please submit a DAR, and then it will be reviewed. And once it's reviewed and approved, then your DAR, the abstract and whatnot will be posted on our website. So we have transparency around the work being done in the enclave.
Okay. All right. Good. All right, next question. It sounds like data contributing sites will need to contribute more data, not just COVID phenotypes, but you stated that the data harmonization pipelines were one of the things that was lost. Does the code still exist? How big of a project will it be to restart the data ingestion to the new N3C?
So to clarify, nothing was lost, right? So everything has been archived and backed up. And in fact, in one of the slides Joni presented, there's a link to a GitHub that archives all of the data ingestion harmonization pipelines. And so hopefully there's a QR code. You can go there and you can access all of that. That being said, with the dynamic workspaces model, there are significant changes that are happening. And so the pipelines are not going to be identical to what was there in the COVID space, but the code exists. It's there. There's an ongoing effort to make the data ingestion harmonization pipelines work with this new dynamic workspaces model. The data contribution, you're correct, will be disease agnostic. For institutions that have been participating in renal and cancer, they're familiar with what that looks like. But ultimately, it's going to be a general broad disease agnostic phenotype that's going to capture a patient population and then generate that payload for N3C.
Thanks. All right, the next question is, when will CTSAs receive the new DUAs? Will these supersede previous agreements or only pertain to new data? And I'll channel Chris Dillon here and say that the new agreements will be needed because of the requirement now by NIH that N3C meets the criteria of a CADR, a controlled access data repository. And so that is the reason for the need for the new agreements.
Correct. Those DUAs
anything
are under
else final.
Yeah, those DUAs are under final review by NIH OGC, and they'll be distributed once they are final. We will need them re-executed. You will not have to terminate previous ones, though. But unfortunately, we will need to re-execute them based on the CADR requirements.
Okay. All right. Another targeted question. When do we submit research requests, as some of our manuscripts are on hold?
Once the enclave is open again, I think that's within that roughly 4-week time period, you'll be able to come back in, and then you'll be able to get access or submit per Kristen's description, access to your prior data use requests that were in the old environment.
Okay. Next question is, have you reached out to institutional ICTS for DUAs? I'm not really sure what
I
the
don't know. I
intent of
responded
this.
to that and said that once the DUAs are complete, we'll go ahead and send them out and distribute them, but they are under final review by NIH-OGC.
Okay. All right. All right, next question. Sorry, I think I get confused. You mentioned PIs already had projects, will continue to access their projects in the new platform, but we need to also submit a new DUR again for it?
Yeah, so this is one of the technical limitations of reopening the platform. We have a record of all DURs that have been submitted in the old environment, and we have all the investigators, the PIs, the researchers that had access to them. But just as a kind of a mechanical exercise, you're going to have to resubmit that, but it will still be that same DUR. It's just that we couldn't take your environment and then reconstitute it in the new one. We have all the metadata, and then you just have to submit that request to the old data use request, and you will gain access to it in the new environment.
Okay. Next one. I think we're starting to get variations of previously asked questions. What about internal HHS requests? Do they have to go through full approval? The short answer is yes. They go through the same process that you will go through in terms of being able to access the data. Okay, and the next question is, will NCATS still pay for the computing costs for research projects within the N3C?
I'll
Joni,
take this one.
do we know that yet?
No, we don't know that, but I will say this. We need to evaluate this on an ongoing basis because we are growing, and we really don't have a line of sight into what that looks like. Also, not only are we growing as N3C, but in this new resource environment that we're working within, it's unclear yet what that is going to look like through those costs. But the idea is that they're certainly mitigated, and so that's one thing that we're counting on. We just don't have a good understanding and time and usage under our belt to really know how to calculate those costs and how to predict those costs. So what I'll say is, for now, those compute costs will be covered by NCATS, but we will be evaluating that on an ongoing basis to make sure that we're able to continue to do all of the things that we want to do and be able to provide those compute costs. But our goal is to make sure that everybody has access to the platform for research questions that we really need to get answered.
Thanks. Okay, the next one is, you mentioned the loss of workbooks in favor of workspaces. What about other Foundry features or applications? Any specifics, especially options for Spark, SQL, and SciPark?
PySpark. Yes, so we are still performing testing, but as far as we are aware, code workbooks are the only application we lose the ability to use. So you can still use PySpark and Spark SQL from within code repositories. As I'm not particularly certain about how it works with code workspaces as of yet, but there are, I believe, the only application loss is for workbooks. So you should still be able to use PySpark and Spark SQL from within the code repositories application.
Okay. All right. Next one is another very specific question. For existing DURs, when we resubmit, can we swap out the PI with someone who was on the project previously?
So that's not
yeah.
Sorry. That's not a straightforward answer. And the reason for that is, as many of you know, when the DTA extensions were signed, not all the original data contributing institutions signed the new ones. And so there was a change in who can have access to data. Now, individuals who had previously had access to data from institutions who did not sign the extensions maintain that access per the data transfer agreements. And so it ultimately is on a case-by-case basis. And so I would encourage you, if you want to swap people out on a project, to reach out to us, and then we'll work through a scenario together.
Okay. Thanks. All right, the next question is, sorry, I missed the first part of the webinar. What is the new Foundry? The old one was using a Palantir tool. What is this vendor tool? Will there be a cohort building component in the future?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the new Foundry is very similar to the old Foundry, minus a specific application, which is the code workbooks that most people in N3C used. So it's still a Palantir Foundry environment. However, if you go back to the earlier part of the presentation, it is recorded and it should be made available online. We are trying to mitigate technical risk by building a series of applications that make up the N3C ecosystem. One of those applications will be a cohort builder. And so there will be a cohort building component in the future with the dynamic workspaces setup. And those components are not necessarily going to be Foundry, but Foundry will remain, at the moment, the analytical environment where investigators carry out their research. That being said, one of the advantages, now it is painful myself as well as an investigator to lose code workbooks because I've done so much work in them and I'm very familiar with them. But the advantage of moving towards code repositories and the other options is that they're more aligned with open source standards and open source tech stacks. And so whatever code you write in there will be a lot more portable, and you'll be able to leverage it in other environments should that analytical environment be different in the future.
Great.
So in a
Thank
sense,
you.
Hythem, we're sort of future-proofing N3C in that way.
Exactly.
All right, so I see no more questions in the Q&A. Any additional comments from the panel here before we close this out?
Yeah, Mike, I'll just make one comment, and that is, first of all, I want to thank everybody for the questions. And if you still have questions, Rebecca showed that there was an email that I now can't remember, but I'm hoping maybe somebody can put it in the Q&A chat so people can see it. And please feel free to use that if you have any questions. We want to engage with you. We also want to make these forums a little bit more routine, and so we're expecting to do another one in the spring. So please stay tuned for our next one of these. And then you may hear from us in between now and then as we start to build out our strategic planning groups. So that's the only thing I wanted to say. Anything else from the group to add?
Let me just say that two more questions have come in. Let's just try to run through them because I think we can address them real quick. If we had existing projects that are no longer relevant for us, can we just submit a new DUR, or do we need to do anything to close out the old projects?
Old projects you don't have to close them out, they'll just expire.
Okay, and then the other one is, sorry if I missed this, will data uploads remain annual?
So under the new, go ahead, Joni.
Oh, you go ahead, Hythem.
Yeah, under the new dynamic workspaces. So just to be super clear, we are not receiving any new data submissions for COVID. Under the new dynamic workspaces model with the disease agnostic data submissions, we are hoping to have a greater frequency than annual. The specifics of what that frequency looks like is TBD, but it'll be part of the discussion with the new agreements when we have those conversations.
Okay. And Rebecca put into the Q&A the email address if there are any questions or comments that arise following this. People can submit to that. I think, yeah, that's trying to see if there's been anything new that has come in. One additional question: if there is a manuscript need to do more analysis for paper review, how can we access the platform now for this purpose?
So
The short,
we're
short answer is like that you can't.
until late February. So once the platform is back open in late February, you can go in. I mean, one of the key reasons we're doing this is for continuity of research. We all have papers and things like that that are under review that need to be updated. And so hopefully once the platform is back up, you can go back in and submit for your GUR, and you'll be able to get access to complete your work.
Yep. Okay. So I think that's it. We're at the end. Joni, last words?
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your engagement today, and we'll see you in the spring.
Great.